Welcome to Supercool, the show about climate solutions that cut emissions, grow profits, and outperform the status quo. Each week, we talk with the innovators reshaping the modern world through breakthrough technologies, strategies, and business models. This is the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation already underway. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe or leave a review wherever you listen. And if you want to go even deeper into next-gen climate innovations now scaling, check out our newsletter for weekly climate business briefings. You can find it at getsuper.cool. Since January, the questions have been constant. With a new administration in Washington, stepping back from climate leadership, will companies slow down? Will the money dry up? Will leaders decide it's safer to say nothing? If I had to think about how to reply in just one word today, that word would be Amazon. Here's why. Back in 2011, I joined a fast-growing e-commerce company called Quidsy that had recently been acquired by Amazon. Quidsy was best known for its biggest site, diapers.com, delivering everything but the baby to new mothers. And everything included a lot of natural and organic products from brands like Burt's Bees and Seventh Generation. My mandate was to launch a new site that would extend the lifetime value of those customers as their kids grew up. We called it Vine.com, like tomato on the vine, a kind of online Whole Foods. In 2012, when we launched, I'd already hosted a national radio and TV show called The Lazy Environmentalist and served as media spokesperson for pretty big brands like Brita and Clorox Greenworks. But at Amazon, I was cleared to speak to the press exactly once in an interview with the New York Times. Amazon's leaders rarely go on record and rarely grant media interviews, which is yet another reason why today's conversation matters. Two senior executives, Chris Rowe, Director of Worldwide Environment for Carbon, and Chris Atkins, Director of Worldwide Operations Sustainability, are here to talk about how they're taking carbon out of the fastest, most complex delivery network in the world. At Amazon, speed isn't a carbon liability. It's a lever for lower emissions. Amazon wrote about it in its recently published 2024 sustainability report, which I'll link to in the show notes. When Amazon's team first mentioned to us that carbon emissions per package have dropped by a third since 2019, we thought, yep, that sounds super cool, and we definitely need to understand how. But sustainability at Amazon is about much more than low-carbon last-mile delivery. The story is really about carbon reduction at unprecedented scale. Amazon has deployed more than 30,000 electric delivery vehicles that collectively delivered 1.5 billion packages last year. The company has deployed over 600 renewable energy projects in more than 20 countries. That's gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, making Amazon the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy. Moving at this scale requires what Amazon is famous for: exceptional operators who break big goals into clear, executable chunks and deliver against them with relentless consistency. That's how Chris and Chris approach outsized targets: clear teams, clear tasks, clear ownership. They make the complex sound, if not simple, then straightforward. Now, 6 years ago, Amazon introduced the Climate Pledge, vowing to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement targets. Normally on Supercool, we don't focus on corporate pledges, we focus on proof. But Amazon is operationalizing this one, not just for itself, but for the 565 signatories across 46 countries and 60 industries. These businesses are collaborating, sharing what works, sending collective demand signals, and moving markets. Beyond that, Amazon has put its sustainability playbook online for anyone to read and use. You can find it at exchange.aboutamazon.com. Here's my conversation with Chris Rowe and Chris Atkins. Chris Rowe, Chris Atkins, welcome to Supercool.
Thanks for having us.
So when we knew Amazon was confirmed that we were going to get a chance to talk to you guys, we were thrilled on this end. It's been so fascinating to watch what's unfolded over the past 5 or 6 years, I think, since the climate pledge was announced, all of the work that's being done behind the scenes at Amazon to be more sustainable. There's so much to get into today. But before we jump in, I just want to give each of you a chance to tell us kind of who you are, how you've grown and evolved within Amazon as the climate and sustainability agenda has also grown and evolved within the company as well. It would just be great to hear as we get the conversation going. So Chris Rowe, why don't we start with you?
Awesome. Yeah, so I've been at Amazon about 9 years now, and I live in a small mountain town just east of Seattle. And when I joined the company, I was really focused on energy procurement and driving toward 100% renewable energy. And as our ambition grew and as our kind of scope changed and we are able to announce the climate pledge, which I hope we get into today, my role changed really to be focused on decarbonization and how to drive agitation around lower carbon solutions across the company. And so I sit within our central sustainability organization, and my job's super fun because I get to work with amazing leaders across each of the business units at Amazon, like Chris Atkins here, to think about how do we decarbonize our built environment? How do we decarbonize our grocery stores, our logistics, data centers, all the things? So it's an endless opportunity to learn, and that's been super fun. But that's where I sit in the organization.
Yeah, it's awesome. And just looking at your title, Director of Worldwide Environment for Carbon, like to think that there's someone in Amazon, given the global scale, the massive scale of your business, that gets to actually have a title and a job working on decarbonization. I would think a lot of folks in the industry, I would think they'd be like, wow, that sounds like a dream job. I don't know if that's how you would classify it, but man, the opportunity just seems really extraordinary.
We cover a lot of surface area, and I hope we get into that today globally. The title is very misleading. It's definitely not a one-person role. It's really a role on mobilizing the collective genius that's around the company. And Chris Atkins is one of those guys that's been super fun to partner with over the years.
That's awesome. All right, Chris Atkins. So your turn now. When I was looking at your background, you've been, I don't want to necessarily say a lifer at Amazon, but you've been there for a very long time, at least like 14 years. And I do think, since I had said to the other Chris right before you hopped on the pre-call, I spent a couple of years at Amazon at Quidsi actually, years ago when that acquisition took place. So in my mind, it's almost like dog years in a way, right? So if you spent 14 years there, it's like that is literally in a career trajectory, probably what you've done and the intensity of what you've done is kind of like a lifetime. At least that's my take, having been on the inside for some amount of time. But same, please tell us about your background, what you've done at Amazon, and how you've grown in your role and transitioned into the sustainability org or climate org. I know you're at Fresh and some other things beforehand, but yeah, would love to hear about that.
It will be 15 years for me with Amazon next April. It still feels like I just started in many ways because the pace of change and the pace of operations, there's always something new to learn around here. But one of the interesting things about being around this long is people reach out to you proactively and want to pick your brain about things. It's just a great honor, to say, oh, somebody actually is interested in what I think about some of this stuff. And I've literally just came from a one-on-one with somebody who was in their first week at Amazon. I asked them, how long have you been here? And they're like, well, a week. I'm like, well, that's like almost 2 months in dog years. So I definitely feel that. I started in core fulfillment operations. I was a night shift area manager, which is kind of running the warehouse floor, the fulfillment center. I worked on the ship dock, so really learned from the ground up our operations and got to work with great people there. People come to Amazon for a number of different reasons, and they all have really interesting stories, and to see folks be able to take their entry point in Amazon and where they end up going from there is really always a super interesting thing to experience firsthand. I stayed in fulfillment operations for a number of years, and then I had an opportunity to move over to Amazon Fresh, and we were really growing our grocery business. This was before the acquisition of Whole Foods, and so we were trying to figure out how does this business become a major growth area opportunity for Amazon, and I had an opportunity to run some of our operations in the northeastern U.S., covering some major markets, New York and D.C. and Boston. But sustainability has always been a passion of mine, something I've wanted to get into, but at the time I didn't really have the experience or the credentials necessary to get into this space. So fast forward to about 6 years ago, this was right before we announced the climate pledge. I had no inkling that the climate pledge was coming, and I was thinking, okay, what's my next career move? And I saw that there was an opening for transportation sustainability, and I basically cold called the hiring manager and said, hey, I know a lot about operations. I don't really necessarily know about sustainability, but I can help you communicate what we're trying to drive with our business leaders. And that worked. So I was able to get in on the ground floor, and obviously the things we're doing around sustainability have only taken off since then, and I've just been really fortunate to be a part of that wave. My team now looks after our worldwide operations sustainability and how do we hit our targets around sustainability in our operations, and really covers our global operating footprint related to fulfillment centers, e-commerce, all of our transportation. So it's a big, fun job, challenging. No 2 days are the same, but that's why I love it.
Awesome. Thank both of you for those quick backgrounds. So, like I said, a lot to get to. I know, Chris Rowe, you mentioned we're hoping we're going to get to the climate pledge. We will. Here's where I want to start, because I think for most people, when they think about Amazon, and obviously this has been the core driving vision, animating force since Jeff Bezos started the company, about delighting the customer, putting the customer first. And so when people think about Amazon, certainly when I think about it, it's fast delivery, something always shows up on time across this whole network wherever I am. One of the things that struck me as I was going through the 2024 sustainability report that was recently released, Amazon Sustainability Report, was this picture that starts to form between the trucks, the warehouses, the fast shipping, that on the outside someone might think, well, gosh, like that has to, of course, have a high carbon footprint. But your organization has brought down the intensity of that carbon footprint pretty dramatically over the last few years, right? I was reading something like per unit carbon's down 33% since 2019. So logistics gets better, gets faster. The windows when things can show up are even like more impressive, and yet carbon per unit is going down. Can we start there? Can you guys start just to help me unpack how that actually makes sense? Because intuitively, it's not what I would envision.
I hear that a lot, that it is sort of counterintuitive, but if you really break it down and you think about where emissions come from, it does start to make sense. So the first thing is to think about how do we become more efficient with the operations that we execute inside the business. We put fulfillment centers and sortation centers and delivery stations in the different places that are close to where our customers are going to be. And I'm going to kind of mess up this quote a little bit, but Jeff famously said something to the effect of, we don't necessarily know all the technology changes and the societal changes that are going to change in 5 to 10, 15 years from now, but there's a couple of things that you can make as a safe bet. And one of those is that customers are going to always want their orders pretty fast, right? Fast is usually a good thing. And so in thinking about how do we grow our business, we've leaned into the opportunities that are good business decisions for our customers, but also good decisions for sustainability. And an example is, if I can have something to you in same day or same day from the time that you ordered it, it means a couple of things. It means it's already close to you. The inventory is already relatively close to you so that we can actually make that package journey in that amount of time. And so by getting closer to the customer, we're eliminating some of the things that we may have had to do more of in the past, like fly something across the country. We can also have it in the backyard, theoretically, in the same zip code of where you're at, and get it to you the same day. And so what that does, if you overlay the sustainability picture onto this, is as we are putting inventory closer and closer to the customer, the lengths of haul that we have to travel to get that package to the customer also reduces. And so when we talk about electrifying fleets and all of the challenges that go into scaling up electric vehicles, range anxiety is always something that people bring up, but if we're hauling shorter and shorter distances, more and more of our legs become eligible for electrification. So on the outbound side, that's from the time that it leaves our fulfillment center till it gets to the customer's doorstep, it's becoming easier, actually, counterintuitively, but easier to use electric vehicles or to use less carbon-intensive modes of transportation. We're doing more and more micro-mobility or walkers in our last mile. We're using bicycles and e-bikes whenever we can as well. And then what it does is it allows us to have those long hauls still happen, right? Because product comes from an import location, and then it might have to travel across a region to get to where it needs to be close to the customer. But those are more predictable movements that happen. We're not reacting immediately to a customer demand signal. And then we can do things like move more of that freight onto intermodal rail, for example, which is much less carbon intensive than having to fly it or having to put it on a truck across country. And so all of this stuff kind of moves towards a less carbon intensive network. We have regionalized our network, so we've purposefully looked at how do we put all of our product in 8 regions in the United States. We're in the process of doing that or have done that in many of the other regions where we operate globally. And that's just really facilitated the ability to get much less carbon intensive on a per unit basis.
The progress you all are making on the logistics side, the electric vehicle side is really amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Back in 2019, when we announced the climate pledge, we made a commitment to deliver over 100,000 electric delivery vans on the road by 2030. We had a strategic partnership that we established with Rivian, and we're really excited about the vehicle that we've been able to deploy in that partnership. And to date, we have over 30,000 electric vehicles on the road. So it's been great to see that journey happen, and we're continuing on towards making that goal and continuing from there.
The only thing I want to add on this one really quick if we can is that this is a global commitment. And I know a lot of folks are seeing Rivian vans now going through the neighborhood here in the US, which is amazing. But in India, for example, we have over 10,000 vehicles deployed. And I think the ramp there has been really exciting to see. We were at about 3.8 thousand a few years ago, and then we hit about 7 or 8,000 a couple years ago. And then last year we hit 10,000. And so that step change year over year has been really cool to see. So customers all over the world are getting their packages delivered with an increasingly electric delivery vehicle, which we're really proud about.
I love the global nature of the deployment that's underway at Amazon. I think it's really impressive, and it's very helpful for us here in the States to understand the global scale at which this is happening, because you operate in all these markets. So really good to hear.
There's also been a tremendous amount of progress on our packaging reductions, as well as making our buildings more efficient. And so over time, it's been amazing for the customer, I think, to see much less packaging come through the door. In fact, like 12% of shipments last year came without any actually Amazon packaging. It was shipped in its own product packaging. Aside from the carbon benefits, also just a better customer experience. And when you have an EV delivering a quiet vehicle through your neighborhood or on foot, and then goods with no packaging on them, like that's just a better customer experience. So we're always looking for ways where carbon and customer experience are correlated, and I think the way Chris described it is exactly right. Hopefully speed is one of those things that you see as a carbon benefit over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, that speed is a carbon benefit over time. And as you're talking about taking down the carbon intensity across the entire supply chain, so from global logistics to regionalizing, wanting to have the right product close to the customer at the right time to be able to do fast delivery and decrease the carbon intensity. So if you're increasing speed and you're decreasing carbon intensity, and Chris Rowe, what you just said, the work being done on packaging, getting rid of waste, I can conceive pretty clearly, like taking waste out of the system, that also has to translate to cost reduction. Is that fair?
Yeah, packaging is an expense, and so when we can reduce packaging, it's really a benefit in three ways. It's a better improvement on waste, improvement on carbon emissions, it's an improvement on cost to serve our customers, and then it's a better customer experience, right? Because who wants to have to deal with excess packaging if we can have less or even none in some cases? And so whenever you have those that check all the boxes, you just lean into those quite naturally. And the same goes for regionalizing our network. It might cost more on the outset to actually set up a network that way, to be as close to the customer as possible, but that's just a better experience for our customers, and we know that's a long-term business driver, and it's also a long-term sustainability driver. And so we look for these win-wins. You know, there'll be plenty of opportunities where we have to have debates on how to meet our goals, but when we can lean in and do something that's a dual benefit, then we always look to do that.
One of the other things that I want to draw out here that I think is really hard to comprehend is the scale that your teams and Amazon are implementing this change on or at. When you said, for example, 30,000 plus electric delivery vehicles, I'm going to imagine that's probably the largest commercial fleet in America today. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But to roll out that kind of fleet and to manage that kind of fleet, and then to have the infrastructure that goes with it, right, the charging stations, and to optimize all of that, and to get all of that infrastructure rolled out so quickly, I think most of us probably don't comprehend. It's hard to understand, like, just the scale at which this is happening. So can you talk us through what's entailed? What does it mean to say 30,000 electric vehicles? I mean, I read the stat I think it was also in the sustainability report or something recent that Amazon put out, 1.5 billion packages or items delivered on electric vehicles last year. And you guys are really just getting started, right? 1.5 billion. It's just massive. So give us a sense of, like, how do you plan that out? How do you roll that out? How big is the team that needs to do that kind of work? It just sounds like there's a lot of complexity that needs to be managed really efficiently because this is a real transformation of a system.
It's definitely a transformation of a system. It's challenging. It's first of its kind work for us, and we believe for most every company that's trying to do this is first of its kind. But I think what's interesting about it is it leans into our core strengths, figuring out what works for the customer, and then doing that as fast as we can. And so if you look at the pandemic, customers were ordering more. Obviously, trips to stores were out of the mix for many people. We were growing at a massive clip. And we're the type of company that is able to pivot fast and react to that and just do things on a pace that is, it's tough for me to imagine. It's just a very, very fast pace of being able to say, okay, we need to make a change. We need to go make an investment and grow our business. And we've taken that same approach to electrifying our fleet. So starting with 2019, as I said, when we made the commitment to deploy 100,000 EV vans, there was an internal pivot where business teams their core job isn't sustainability, their core job is to deliver packages to customers, really picked up the work and said, okay, right, we're going to do this. What are all the steps that go into it? And it's just kind of a natural planning process of, okay, let's work backwards from the delivery date. We're going to get these on the road by such and such date. Well, we've got to have infrastructure. That means we're going to have the right ability to bring power to these locations in time to have these vehicles deployed. So that means we've got to have a team built out that understands utilities and that can work with utility partners. The differences between different utility providers can be massive. I think somebody joked, like, if you've met one utility company, you've met one utility company, because they all have their differences. And so you have to bring in people who know that space and understand how we can work with our utility providers, and then how do you do that at a pace that's never been seen before. It's a huge challenge. We've learned a lot in those deployments that we're taking into how we think about other things that we've got to scale up related to decarbonization. But what's great about it is the team really absorbs it into business as usual and takes it as, this is how we operate now. And so it is a bit of a paradigm shift, but the teams always rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I love that. Chris Rowe, were you going to...
The only thing I'll add to that is that model and theory of change is kind of translated across several different corners of our business. I would point to renewable energy being another piece of that puzzle. These are daunting tasks and long-term challenges that we're working backwards from, but you never should underestimate the power of a good old-fashioned mechanism with real output metrics and real single-threaded leaders that are accountable to make that thing happen. And like any complex challenge, breaking it down into bite-sized chunks that you can build on and really just go after month after month, after quarter, after year. I mean, when we announced our commitment to match 100% of our electricity consumption with renewable energy, we were at 42% at that point in time in 2019. We met that goal to be 100% a couple of years ago now, and so it took 4 or 5 years to get there. But the power of deputizing real leaders and real experts to break that down across rooftop solar, obviously our utility scale wind and solar investments, and our battery storage work, partnering with utilities on green utility tariffs across different places around the world, and of course not forgetting about energy efficiency and making sure we're designing and building not just buildings but now vehicles with ultra efficiency in mind. That has allowed us to chip away at these output metrics to get to 100% renewable energy. So I think it's just, Chris and I both have the luxury of working at a massive scale, but I think the flip side of that is needing to be very deliberate and breaking down the problem into bite-sized chunks that you can actually achieve and go forward with and operationalize. And really, I think Chris said it well, it's about deputizing the sustainability objectives and metrics into the business. And then it's not a sustainability team thing. It's getting these opportunities into the hands of the actual operators who know the business better than any of us to really go make progress over time. So
I can fully appreciate that. And I think that's always a question that I'm wondering too, is when you see how Amazon is pushing on many fronts toward the climate pledge, right? By 2040, we're going to get to net zero 10 years ahead of the Paris Treaty or the kind of global commitments, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, well, we have a mission, and our mission is to delight the customer. And now we have the sustainability goal, but everybody knows a company's not going to get to a sustainability goal if it's just external to how the business operates, and it has to be integrated. There's just not a lot of examples of companies that are doing that extremely well. Like, we're going to talk soon to Interface Floor. They're a $1 billion plus company that is doing that incredibly well and is a real inspiration and leader. And I think to hear you talk about it, Chris, it sounds like a very Amazon way to go about it. We got to break this thing apart. We have to figure out how do we operationalize it and who owns it to actually get it done. That sounds like that's the key.
Yeah, and when you pull your head out of the sand and realize, oh wow, we're now the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy with over 600 projects and 30 plus gigawatts around the world, those numbers are astounding, but they don't just happen. They happen because we've broken the problem down in ways that people can actually drive progress against. And honestly, that was kind of the theory of change with the climate pledge itself. If I step back, in 2019, we thought about what are we going to commit to. Actually, Amazon's own emissions aren't nearly as interesting as trying to figure out, we build a community of like-minded corporates that are all committed to 2040 to hit net zero 10 years ahead of Paris. And now you fast forward that, we have over 550 companies that have joined that across dozens of industries, 40 plus countries. And now breaking that problem down across industries, how do we think about problems commonly? How do we look about joint action across transportation, the built environment, obviously IT hardware, packaging, etc.? And you find when you really dig in, these problems are pretty common, and we need to figure out how we don't solve it 15 times. We think about how we collapse and share our collective expertise to really drive change at scale. And that's kind of what the Climate Pledge is designed to do, is not to be about one company, but be about kind of one objective that all companies can work backwards from.
I'm going to come back to that, but I want to stay on the carbon-free energy, renewable energy, the projects that have been rolled out. And I'm glad you brought it up. 600 projects globally. And again, what's so fascinating to me is just the scale that this is happening on. And so when I read, for example, so Aaron, my co-founder and producer, we were looking at this, I think, in January when some information came out about this. I'm kind of quoting it. It says, Amazon's invested in 40 utility-scale solar wind projects across countries with a mix of fossil fuels and high emissions. So actually looking to be targeted in where you go put these projects to try and drive decarbonization, right? Including Australia, China, Greece, India, Indonesia, Poland, and South Africa. And then here in the States, in Louisiana, Mississippi. But if you think about that geography and you think, okay, this is a company that, at least on the e-commerce side, is designed to deliver goods. And yet here is this gigawatts of energy that is being invested in and enabled and is diverse in its own right across countries. I mean, the thing that I always come back to is no one's telling Amazon they have to do this. It's just so fascinating to me that this is what you have taken on as a company across such a diverse geography. Mm-hmm. I mean, what kind of response do you get from stakeholders? Maybe it is related to the Climate Pledge when they look at how you're operating. Is there a sharing of information? People saying, how the heck do you guys do that?
We're trying to figure out how do we share information and not just make it us sharing, but we're learners. And I think we are really grateful for all the work that's happened in this space, and we've learned a lot from it. And so it's having that exchange is critical. And so last year, we launched what we're calling the Sustainability Exchange, which is just that. It's a way to democratize our learnings and share models, share data, share playbooks, share case studies, and feature case studies from other companies that have solved really tough problems that others can learn from. On the energy work, I'm particularly proud of some of the firsts that we've been able to do is kind of be the first corporate purchaser at scale in South Africa. And we've unlocked barriers to commercial access to all corporates in India and other countries like that. And I think, for us, we are very fortunate to have an amazing team of experts that know how to operate and figure out tough problems in the field. But the reality is we need actors across all small, medium, and large enterprises to drive carbon-free electricity. And if we're only building schemes and mechanisms and procurement off-taker kind of agreements that work for large corporates, we're not actually solving the problem. So we're really mindful to make sure that we're leaving those breadcrumbs and maybe the first to market, but finding ways to make sure that the access points are there for anyone. And then, of course, sharing our learnings along the way, because these things don't come easy. They take time. Our path will not be linear. There's ups, there's downs, there's everything in between. We learn a lot. And so sharing it through the Sustainability Exchange for us online, publicly, for free, is a step in that direction. And really, it's to help motivate and hopefully mobilize our suppliers and figure out how we can reduce emissions beyond our four walls.
I would just add, I spend a lot of time thinking and talking with others in industry about these problems and saying, how can we learn from each other? One of the things I like to say to partners is, yes, we've made a lot of great progress, but we've got a lot of stuff that we still have to figure out. And we got to figure it out together. And there are areas where others are ahead of us, and we want to learn from that and vice versa. That's why the Sustainability Exchange is such a great and powerful tool that I'm really excited about. I think some of the other things that we've started to do in collaboration is sending these strong demand signals to the industry players who are going to be building out low carbon fuels, battery electric vehicles, low carbon construction materials, concrete and steel production. And we've been a part of some of these larger buyers alliances that I think have helped provide confidence that there's willing buyers ready to go adopt these technologies. So a couple examples are the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, which is an alliance of companies that are investing and wanting to invest more in sustainable aviation fuel. The Sustainable Steel Buyers Alliance, looking at green steel solutions for the built environment. And then there's an organization called Green Market Activation, which is looking at how do we do this in the built environment? How do we do this along electric trucking examples? And so I think that's just another way that's really important that we lean into the opportunities that we have to work together with industry.
Yeah, Chris Atkins, I appreciate that. And I was looking at a post that you had put on LinkedIn probably a few weeks ago mentioning some of those organizations. So I did think that was interesting. You were talking about the sustainability report, but you kind of called out the organizations and initiatives that Amazon is part of, and some of these, like you mentioned, like the Clean Buyers Association. You're working with Rocky Mountain Institute's Sustainable Steel Buyers Platform, the Smart Freight Center, the Center for Green Market Activation, and then I see like joining like the US DOE on better buildings, commercial buildings, heat pumps, like all this stuff. You guys are at the table with different industries actually, because it's across different sectors, different parts of your business, to drive shared learnings, create, I guess, as you said, send that demand signal, that market activation. These are big markets that there is a lot of dollars at play. If you, industry, can help us, Amazon, figure this out, I think that would probably be a very enticing hook. The piece, Chris Rowe, that you mentioned that I just want to drill into for a second as well, you talked about, okay, we're making these playbooks. Amazon, we've learned a lot. There's a lot more to learn, but we share our learnings. We want to help other companies, companies that have signed on to the climate pledge, I imagine others as well. You said it's a free resource. See what we're doing and hopefully entice more companies to sign on as well. I get all that. You also mentioned, though, saying how do we, this company with a huge global footprint, thousands and thousands of suppliers, how do we enable companies of different sizes to come along with us on this journey, presumably? Can you talk about some of those efforts, what goes into that?
For sure. Breaking it way down, we really just want two things to be true. The first is that there's a real plan for each of the companies that we work with, and that means having credible targets and that they're sharing progress. So do you have a plan? That, number one, is much as important. And number two is, are you reducing emissions? Like, how are you actually taking action? And I think we can kind of actually get stuck in the measurement spiral and pretending that reporting and measurement alone is the thing, and it's not. It's a piece of an important puzzle, but really it's about action and reductions. That's the whole spirit behind the exchange, really, is to say, how do we drive action? And sometimes you need really good telemetry and really good data, and obviously I'm not trying to downplay the importance of that. It's just that we're really about that next piece, is how do we reduce emissions. For our supply chain, it's very large, very complex. It's kind of a head, torso, tail problem, really. We've identified a list of our top suppliers who represent about 50% of our indirect emissions. And we're trying to work directly, or we have been, for several years, but we are working directly to make sure that that plan's in place and they're taking action to reduce emissions. And then torsos in the middle there are trying to figure out what is needed and what's scalable. And so we've been also trying to think about joint action projects. And so we have several examples on the transportation logistics world or in the energy world where we're trying to figure out, hey, you are a supplier of this size and scale and this geography, and you don't have an energy team behind you. We get it. Here are some avenues that we might be able to partner with, and maybe we take the offtake agreement on a power purchase agreement, and maybe we're the anchor tenant, so to speak. And hey, but we'll invite you in, and you can be an offtaker as well at a smaller scale or whatever scale makes sense for you. So we're trying to do those types of projects that really get at the head and the torso and really unlock some of the more intractable problems. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking electrons, we're talking molecules, and we're talking materials. And so we are all super busy, and all these companies and suppliers are super busy, and we got to keep it simple and we got to keep it fun if we're going to make some progress. And so that's our spirit behind it, is let's drive some action, let's make it fun, let's make it simple, and let's get to work.
Yeah, I love that. Chris Atkins, you're nodding. Do you want to add anything to
I don't want to add anything. I actually just want to go do it now. I'm pretty inspired, Chris.
Pretty pumped up. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's switch gears. I want to get your thoughts on what's happening on the AI front, the hyperscaler front. I think the question that many people will be wondering is, how are you thinking about AI, hyperscaling, data centers in terms of the energy impact? I know you've signed some agreements, made some announcements to work with some potential nuclear options, kind of reconstitute some nuclear. Obviously, you have all the renewable energy. I've been reading more and more that just as the cost of renewables are coming down and storage is coming down, that there may even be an opportunity to create mini utilities in its own right, given the scale of some of these data centers. But I'm just curious, like, how do you think about that, the carbon footprint, the operational cost, and align that with the goals and targets around carbon and climate?
It's top of mind for all of us, and I think no good ideas are off the table at the moment. The AWS kind of cloud computing part of our business is doing amazing work in early days on figuring out what is not just on the demand side, but like how are we going to use AI to advance our climate objectives, our sustainability work. I have several examples. The cloud is about 4 times more efficient than on-premise data centers just to start with, right? And I think energy efficiency has been a hugely important piece. I don't want to just jump to the supply side solves. We really got to stay focused on reducing demand and making sure that's part of our strategy, which it absolutely is within AWS. And so in that spirit, there is such thing as good growth. And so getting onto the cloud with a much more efficient way to compute, and then figuring out our supply side challenges on making sure that we're matching up with carbon-free electricity. You're absolutely right. We're looking into nuclear, geothermal, obviously wind and solar, battery storage, very much dependent on the geography, very much dependent on the local dynamics with not just policymakers, but as Chris Atkins mentioned, our utility relationships, which are critical to help us in this space. And if you think about that, I still am pretty bullish and super excited about the outcomes of what the AI changes will allow us to do more effectively. And just one example that I get super excited about, we had a 150 megawatt solar farm and a 75 megawatt battery system, kind of utility scale battery system in Southern California launched about a year ago. And when you look at that one project, which is, by the way, is out of over 600 that we've deployed globally, that one project alone generates billions of data points. When you look at the actual operational dynamics, the weather dynamics, the electricity market dynamics, the emission dynamics, I mean, there's so much to talk about in terms of data acquisition and intelligence within that, just that one large system. I don't care how good you are at Excel. None of us are going to be able to crunch on all those variables in ways that allow us to make the smart, most optimized decisions about reducing emissions, reducing maintenance costs, and optimizing the generating potential of that resource. So we're just getting started, but we've applied AI models to that type of use case that I think are going to prove extraordinarily beneficial over time. But we're just getting started. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how we're thinking about it.
I would just add, I think about the hyperscaling needed on the energy side to meet climate goals. And we talk about that a lot, I think, in the climate community. And I think about how much of our energy on the grid ends up not being used just because of the demand profile the way it is. And so AI just is a big unlock for being able to best match production with demand. And I think about data centers, of course, but also for operations. It's a non-starter that we have to have energy for our vehicles to operate our vehicles. Our customers expect packages delivered on time. And so what we need to have is this combination of improved efficiency on the grid, but then also distributed energy. And I think that the more we do that, it's just an aid to the broader grid as we scale up. It's a business imperative to have battery storage and solar or wind combined whenever possible. And I think as we do that more, we're going to ease the burden on the grid as we scale up, because we've all seen the numbers of how much we have to scale on the grid. So I think that's really exciting from an AI perspective. I'll give one somewhat small example of how it's already being used inside of our buildings. We use a lot of conveyance to move packages around inside of our fulfillment centers, sortation centers, and that relies on energy and air pressure that's really pulling or pushing conveyance. And the only way that we really in the past know if we have an air pressure leak or something that's going to create more energy demand is by having somebody manually go and inspect all these different points, which is a time and resource intensive proposition. By using machine learning and building management systems that have AI capabilities built in, we're now seeing proactive alerts saying, hey, there's something going on at this conveyance point, and it's alerting our team on the ground to be able to proactively identify these inefficiencies and then fix them before we ever see it on a report somewhere or a utility bill or something.
So quickly, our perspective at Supercool is, we've talked to companies like Brainbox AI that figured out, right, with AI, how do you drive down HVAC costs in buildings? Because same thing, a million variables, sun angle, wind speed, when is there less carbon intensity on the grid? When is cost lower? How do we optimize a building and drive down carbon and HVAC costs? We've seen use cases with a company like Zoom, ZUM, that's electrifying student buses and optimizing bus routes for 4,000 schools across the country, and that's AI optimized. It's really fascinating to me what the upside is from what I think AI can do. And that strikes me largely as either just drives far more efficiency, and therefore that's an unlock just in terms of what you can compute, or it sounds like what you're saying with conveyance, and maybe that's actually a different use case, but it's pattern recognition. So we're in like a recycling facility, we can actually see what needs to be recycled and actually pull that out faster than a human can. There's all these cool cases. And then the other thing I'll say on the grid side, we've had folks on the show like Tim Holt from Siemens Energy, who's on their board, who's looking at the grid and actually oversees grid technologies. And so we get that lens too, where like the vision is to make the grid as automated and awesome as like a self-driving car, right? What I'm hearing from you guys is a similar hope and drive to say, okay, we've got this grid, it's not very efficient, we only utilize about half of it anyway. How do we actually make that more efficient? Drive local generation as well, that's obviously a key trend. And there's this upside too in AI. That's what I'm hearing. I just don't want to dismiss the question if there is the energy component as well. It just takes a lot of energy as you guys are thinking about the overall plan. Just so you kind of know where I'm coming from as I'm asking the question.
For sure. The good news is that we know how to deploy carbon-free electricity across the world. This is not something that doesn't have a technology solve that's available yet. Now, we do obviously have challenges to reach commercial scale and cost parity in certain parts of the world or in certain geographies. So I don't mean to dismiss that it's going to be simple. But the good news is that as we electrify, we know the lever to decarbonize electricity use. And so I think that's the good news.
That's awesome. This has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate both of you taking the time to talk with me. What did I not get to?
We covered a lot of good surface area, which I appreciate. Well, I just want to say thank you for having us on and being able to talk about our experience. And I think the more and more we can curate conversations like this is just good for the movement and good for what we're all trying to accomplish. So I just appreciate that. I'm glad to be a chance to talk about the Climate Pledge in particular. I mean, we're constantly recruiting companies to kind of join us. And if this is interesting to your listeners, we'd be happy to have a conversation about what it means to join the signatory community, because the more the merrier, truly, but also the more we can kind of get into it and solve some problems together. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, I definitely would welcome a conversation with anyone interested in joining Climate Pledge or working with us directly on some of these opportunities. I was thinking about this when you were reflecting on the data point about reducing our emissions per unit by a third since 2019 is, I like to hike. That's one of my favorite things to do in my free time. And you always are looking up at where you got to go and how steep the mountain is. And often enough, we don't look back at where we started and how far we've come. So I think it's good to do that, but also be humble enough to recognize that we've got a lot to figure out still. There's a lot of, uncertainty right now, and we talk about that a lot. But what gets me excited is just the output that we're seeing from the continued downward curve of cost on renewable energy, the reduction of price on batteries. I mean, that was one that a couple of years ago I would not have anticipated how precipitously the price of a battery pack has been dropping. And so all these technologies, to Chris Rowe's point, we have the solve, but then it's been a matter of operationalizing it and bringing the cost down. And now we're seeing the path for that. So it is exciting, and I'm just really happy that I get to be, part of the team that gets to work on this. But thanks again for having us. Really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both, Chris Atkins, Chris Rowe, for joining us today. Thanks so much for listening to my conversation with Chris and Chris. If you enjoyed it and appreciate the perspective Supercool brings to the business and climate conversation, please take a moment to subscribe or follow us and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening. It's the best way you can help us reach new audiences who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.